Good morning, everybody. So, welcome to Wednesday, September 2nd. So, let's take a look at the agenda for today. So, access Google Classroom. Make sure you complete today's warm up. And then we are going to be talking about sinners in the hands of an angry God today. So, the presentation here is in PDF format because PowerPoint didn't want to play nice with Google Drive. So, bear with me with this. Okay, so sinners in the hands of an angry God. Jonathan Edwards is the gentleman who gives this sermon, and if you look at this slide here, you'll see he delivered the speech in Enfield, Connecticut in 1741, and it was a 6-hour sermon. So long sermons like that wouldn't be out of place, especially in Puritan times. Um, so what's interesting about this sermon is it's still one of the most famous sermons that's been given on American soil, and just the imagery of it is just was so scary to the Puritans at the time. So, but what was interesting is as he gave it, he wasn't like shouting and giving a lot of hand motions. He was just very even. He just stared at the back of the church, at the little bell rope at the back that you pull to sound the bell. He just stared at that the whole time. He spoke evenly. He had to tell people to quiet down quite a bit. And what he was saying, people just lost their minds. They were freaking out. They were passing out, screaming wildly. They screamed in terror. People fainted. He had to ask for silence several times. Even it got so bad that after this, his sermons were full of this kind of scary imagery. A lot of the Puritans were afraid to even come back or bring their children to the services. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So, what do we know about his audience? Obviously, they're Puritans, very religious people. So, what was he trying to do with the sermon? Persuade through fear. And the quote from him was, I think it is a reasonable thing to fright persons away from hell. Is it not a reasonable thing to fright a person out of a house on fire? So he's doing everything he can to show these people how bad hell is and how bad their situation is. He's like, I mean, you do the same thing. You pull somebody out, yell at them, scream at them, get them out of a house on fire. So that's kind of his justification for that. So obviously, this is a very persuasive speech. So what techniques is he using? What rhetorical tools? You'll see imagery, you'll see repetition, ethos, pathos, logos, a lot of metaphors, a lot of similes as well. So as you're reading through this sermon, ask yourself these questions. Why did the sermon freak people out so much in 1741? Especially think about his audience, the Puritans. And would people today have the same reaction as back then? So a little bit about Jonathan Edwards. Very smart man. He learned Latin, Greek, and Hebrew before he was 12. Age 13, he left for what is now Yale University and graduated as valedictorian at age 17. So he was a heavy influence on the Great Awakening. Now, when the Puritans first came over, obviously they all have the same kind of values and beliefs. So society is really built around kind of that very religious God first mentality. As more and more immigrants come over throughout time, some of those original values are challenged. So you'll see there's less spirituality. The colleges were starting to move from like ministry schools to be more academic. So religion was kind of on the wane until this period of that's known as the Great Awakening. So it was a time of religious revival in America. Preachers were attracting people in droves, emotional reactions, mass conversions with their sermons. So Edwards believed in orthodoxy, which is basically a return to the foundations of the church, and he felt that people were losing their religion. So he really wanted to take these drastic steps to kind of pull them back in. So final days, some things about him. Like I said, after his sermon and the way he preached, some Puritans were objecting to his extreme teachings. So they removed him from his post. He went into exile, served as a missionary to Native Americans for a while. Um, then spent some time. He constantly was writing, studying the Bible. He became president of what is now Princeton University. But he died from a smallpox after receiving a smallpox vaccine. So it isn't. Um, the weird thing about it is it's not like a shot like we think of today. If you look on the left there, it tells you the accepted procedure involved rubbing matter removed from a pustule into a small incision made between the thumb and index finger. So basically, someone who had smallpox, they would rub their finger in one of those old sores or something, and there'd be a cut that you make in the person getting the vaccine, and you rub that material in there, and basically that infects them, but it's supposed to be a small enough amount that hopefully they get over it and then live a nice, healthy life free of the vaccine. Edward's case did not work out well. At first, he was fine, but then he came down with a mild case of smallpox, appeared to be on the mend, but he was overworking himself at the time as well, getting older in years, and this pox just spread and he couldn't contain it. So died from the smallpox vaccine. All right, so let's get into the actual sermon itself. So sinners in the hands of an angry God. So if you look at the text, which you can pull up through Google Classroom or it's available on the website. So it starts off basically from two different verses of the Bible. One passage is from the book of Amos, and it's referencing God's ability to find sinners and take them back to hell no matter where they are. And the second passage is from Deuteronomy, which you'll see at the top of the sermon, and it simply says, their foot shall slide in due time. So these are kind of the two verses he bases his sermon off of. So he contextualizes these verses by saying, even though God was kind to the Israelites, they betrayed him, and therefore God brought vengeance upon him. Quote from Deuteronomy is God's threat of vengeance, and you'll see this theme of God's vengeance, and God is an angry God, and he really doesn't have to save you from hell. So this theme kind of runs throughout the sermon. So from his close reading of the Deuteronomy quote, Edwards comes to one central conclusion. There's nothing that keeps wicked men out at any one moment out of hell but the mere pleasure of God. Edwards then proceeds to meditate on this conclusion with a list of 10 observations. So I did not include all 10 observations in the excerpt of the sermon that you guys are going to be looking at, just the one once, just a couple with which what I felt was stronger imagery, because that is what we're doing for our project, really analyzing the imagery that he chooses to include in his sermon. And then he goes on to what's called the application. So after he's had his 10 observations, so how does this apply to your life? Edward states outright that his purpose for the sermon is bring people back to the congregation, bring people back to the church. He does this by invoking God's wrath through a series of frightening metaphors. Edward says that sin makes people heavy as lead. Without God's hand, they would descend straight into hell. That's just one example. There's several others, a lot of vivid imagery. So take a look at this. Another one that you'll see quite often is the image of God dangling you above the pit as somebody holds a spider above a fire pit. God abhors sinners. God hates sinners. And the sinners had dreadfully provoked him. So you can kind of see this is not, for those of you that do go to church, this is not the loving God that you would hear about in most of today's sermon. This is the vengeful God who really does not have to save you from hell. And again, Edwards is using kind of these tactics because he feels like people are losing their religion. So he's doing anything he can to keep them from ending up in hell. All right. So that is just a brief introduction to the sermon. I'm going to have you guys read through that on your own. So to access that, there is a link here, and it's going to ask you to make your own copy. So read through that, and then we'll take a look at the assignment for today. So this is an imagery assignment. So this is has an artistic component as well as a analytical component to it. So you can see some examples here. Basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to be picking what you feel is the strongest piece of imagery from the excerpt of the sermon we're looking at. You're going to draw that out. So your art, I know not everybody's a great artist. You're not going to be graded on your artistic skill. It's more, do you understand the sermon, and can you create an accurate representation of basically what he's trying to say, or the the imagery that he's using to try to draw people back to the church. So you will put your picture on one side of the paper, color it, make it look nice, whatever you have to do. A lot of detail. Detail is important. And then you'll put the excerpt that you used from the sermon. Just write it somewhere above it. You can see in the two pictures here. It's just written at the top of the page, but just put it on there wherever it makes sense. Don't just write it on there, but try to make it kind of like an artistic piece as well. All right. And then once you have the picture done, you'll write your response. And this is basically just an analysis of what Edwards is doing. The body is where you're specifically explaining your picture, why you drew what you did, why you used the coloring you did, and so on. You can read the directions for that. And then finally, at conclusion, you'll talk about how your image that you created contributes to Edwards' overall purpose in his sermon. All right. You can see the breakdown there, response 50 points. So that is your part right here in the creative portion, which is your drawing, is 50 points as well. So take some time. I'm going to give you guys a couple of days to work on this. So we'll be working on this today and tomorrow. It's going to be due Friday before midnight. So take some time, make it look good, add that detail, have some fun with this one. I know we've been doing a lot of close reading and annotation. So this is a chance for you guys to really flex those creative muscles on this. All right. So hopefully you kind of, well, I wouldn't say enjoy, but are struck by kind of the crazy imagery that Edwards uses in this sermon. All right. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, go ahead and work on this. Again, basically, you'll be doing this today and tomorrow, and we'll pick back up with something new on Friday. And this project will be due Friday by midnight. All right. Have a great day.